Have you ever stood in a place so quiet it screamed, where flickering lights buzz above you like dying stars, and every shadow feels like a dead end? That's where Rachel stood, soaked to the bone, clutching a worn folder and one last $10 bill. Her life was unraveling. She was cold, late, hungry, and then a stranger appeared, asking for the only thing she had left. What happened next? It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It became the beginning of a miracle. If this pulled at your heart, hit that like button, subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and drop a comment. What would you have done in her shoes? Because just as the bus hissed to a stop and the cold pressed closer, Rachel made a decision no one expected, least of all herself. The bus depot pulsed with tired light and a cold that clung like wet wool. Flickering overhead bulbs cast anxious shadows across the concrete, pooling in the corners like things left behind. Puddles dotted the cracked floor, reflecting the sickly amber glow above and the silhouettes of people moving through fog as if underwater. Rachel stood still, clutching a manila folder to her chest. Her resume inside was already wrinkled, its edges curling from moisture. She could feel the dampness creeping through her shoes, numbing her toes, seeping into her bones. Each breath left her lips in a faint cloud that vanished before it could warm the air. A loudspeaker above crackled, then died into silence. Somewhere far off, brakes squealed, followed by the hollow cough of a diesel engine. She didn't turn toward it. Her eyes were fixed on the schedule board, blinking and distorted behind old plexiglass, just like her hope. 10 minutes until her bus. 10 minutes until a job interview that felt more like a desperate prayer than a plan. Her fingers dipped into her coat pocket, brushing the soft, worn edge of her last $10 bill. She'd counted it a dozen times that morning, enough for a sandwich after the interview. A small reward for surviving another day. That's all it was supposed to be. Then came the voice. "Excuse me." Rachel turned. A man stood a few feet away, rain soaking into his hoodie, turning the fabric heavy. His beard was unkempt, his eyes sunken but startlingly clear. He looked like someone who hadn't been warm in days. I hate to ask this," he said, voice shaky but respectful. "But I just need $10. My wallet's gone and I need to get home. I'll pay you back, I swear." She froze. $10. Her fingers curled tighter around it inside her coat. "You can't call anyone?" she asked. "No phone." "It's dead. I tried asking others. No one even stopped." She could walk away. She should walk away. But she didn't. As her bus pulled in with a hiss and a groan, she made a decision that made no sense, except to her. Rachel held out the $10 bill, her hand trembling slightly as it hovered between them. The man looked at it like it was something sacred, like he wasn't sure it was real. His lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound came. Slowly, carefully, he took it from her, his fingers brushing hers, ice-cold and calloused. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. "I swear, I'll pay you back." Rachel managed a tight smile, unsure what to say. "Just get home safe." The man gave a quick nod, then turned as the bus pulled in, its headlights catching the wet pavement. Within moments, he was gone, lost in a blur of passengers and steam rising from the idling engine. She watched the bus roll away, heart pounding, unsure if she'd just done something kind or something foolish. Her stomach clenched, not from hunger, but from uncertainty. That bill had been her cushion, her one backup plan. Now she had nothing. Rachel boarded her own bus in silence, her clothes still damp, the warmth of the cabin a small relief. She sank into a window seat and stared out as the depot faded into gray. Her hands sat folded in her lap, still remembering the weight of that crumpled bill, now resting in someone else's pocket. She tried to shake the thought, tried to focus on the interview, but a tiny voice kept whispering. What if he lied? What if she'd been naive? Yet, somewhere deeper, another voice pushed back. What if he hadn't? What if she'd been exactly what he needed at that moment? She closed her eyes and let the bus carry her forward, unsure if what she'd given away was just money or the start of something bigger. The interview building loomed tall and impersonal, its glass exterior reflecting the low-hanging clouds. Rachel stood at the front doors, heart racing, socks damp inside her shoes, hair still damp from the drizzle. She glanced at the time, 12:23. She was 23 minutes late. The bus had stopped twice for traffic. She'd run the last 4 blocks. Her stomach growled, empty, but she ignored it and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up, polite but distant. "Can I help you? I had an interview at noon. Rachel Evans." The woman's eyes flicked to the clock, then back to Rachel's soaked coat and tired face. "I'm sorry," she said, lips pressed into a line. "He's in another meeting now. You'll have to reschedule." Rachel opened her mouth to explain, to ask for a few minutes, to beg, but the woman had already turned back to her screen. She stood there for a beat longer, then slowly backed away, her fingers tightening around the folder as she stepped back into the cold. The wind cut sharper now. Her clothes clung heavier to her skin. She walked the mile back to her apartment in silence, each step a reminder of failure. When she turned the corner onto her street, she saw him, her landlord, standing outside her unit door with crossed arms. "Rachel," he called, "rent was due 3 days ago." "I know," she said, voice small. I'm trying to. You said that last week. I can't keep waiting. Someone else is ready to take the unit tomorrow." She didn't argue, didn't cry. There was no strength left for that. Inside, she packed what little she owned. 2 changes of clothes, an old library book, a cracked phone with no service. She zipped it all into a faded backpack and stepped back into the gray afternoon. She had no job, no home, no plan, just a direction, and the slow, sinking weight of everything slipping away. That night, Rachel found herself wandering through downtown with nowhere to be and no one to call. The city buzzed around her. Cars, laughter spilling from restaurants, the clatter of subway grates, none of it for her. She ended up at the public library, a place she remembered from quieter days. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she curled into a corner behind the nonfiction shelves. It was warm, and the security guard didn't say anything, just gave her a tired look, as if he'd seen this before. She stayed until closing. The guard gently shook her shoulder when it was time to leave. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, lying. The night air was sharp. She wandered until she found a bench under a flickering street lamp near the river. It was metal, unforgiving, and cold, straight through to her bones. She wrapped her arms around her backpack and curled up, pulling her coat as tight as it would go. The city finally slowed. Lights dimmed, traffic thinned, and stillness crept in. She didn't sleep much. The next morning, she washed her face in a gas station bathroom and used toilet paper to dry it. She looked in the mirror. Hair wild, eyes tired, skin pale. The girl staring back didn't look like anyone she used to recognize. Each day became a pattern. Library during the day, parks or bus stops at night. She walked until her feet blistered, until she stopped checking job boards and just looked for somewhere to sit. Hope, once a flame inside her, had shrunk to a flicker. One afternoon, as she sat on the edge of a bus shelter bench, trying to dry her socks in a patch of sun, a group of teenagers passed. One boy tossed an empty soda can that bounced at her feet. "Get a job," he muttered under his breath, laughing as he walked away. She didn't react. She just looked at the can, then away. That night, the library was closed for a holiday. She paced the sidewalks until her legs gave out and finally curled into the corner of a closed cafe's awning. The wind howled louder there. Her chest ached, not from the cold, but from the hollowness inside. And for the first time since she'd lost everything, Rachel let the tears fall. The morning was brittle and gray when Rachel woke up beneath the cafe awning, her neck stiff, fingers numb. She sat up slowly, brushing crumbs of leaves from her coat. The city was already in motion. Joggers passing, dogs barking, traffic rolling by like it had somewhere to be. She didn't. She wandered to the park, drawn by habit more than choice, and found her usual bench near a worn bronze statue of a general nobody remembered. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to keep warm. Hunger gnawed again, sharper now, more insistent. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. That's when she noticed him. An older man, maybe in his 70s, approached slowly, a brown paper bag in one hand and a walking cane in the other. He wore a wool scarf tucked carefully around his neck, and though his steps were small, his eyes were clear, steady. He paused a few feet away. "You look like you could use something warm," he said gently. Rachel blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'm fine," she muttered automatically. The man smiled, not judging, just kind. He sat beside her, reached into the bag, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "I bring an extra every morning," he said. "Just in case." She shook her head. "I can't take that." "Why not?" he asked softly. "Is pride heavier than hunger?" Rachel looked down, ashamed. Her stomach growled in answer. The man didn't press her. He just waited, patient, present. Finally, Rachel reached out and took it. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped the paper. The first bite made her throat tighten with more than hunger. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "There's a place on Maple Street, Shelter Kitchen. They serve lunch, and they're always looking for help. You look like someone who could use a warm meal, and maybe a reason to stay a little longer." Rachel didn't answer, but she looked at him longer than she meant to, and for the first time in days, something inside her leaned forward, even if just a little. The Shelter Kitchen on Maple Street was easy to miss, just a squat brick building with a fading mural and a wooden sign that read, "Harvest Room." Rachel hesitated outside the door, nerves fluttering in her chest. She wasn't sure what she was even asking for. A meal? A job? A place to stand for more than 5 minutes without being told to move? She stepped inside. Warmth hit her first. Real warmth, from both the space and the people moving inside it. The smell of soup drifted through the air, laced with something baked and comforting. Voices overlapped in quiet chatter, the clatter of dishes, laughter from the back. Behind a long serving counter stood a woman in her 50s, hair tied up, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand like it was a permanent extension of her arm. "Help you?" she asked, not unkindly, just direct. Someone told me to come. An older man in the park. He said you might need help here," Rachel said, suddenly unsure how to explain herself. The woman tilted her head, then smiled. "That'd be Frank. He's got a radar for people who need a second chance." Rachel nodded, barely able to hold her gaze. "You willing to work?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Anything." "Good. Grab an apron." Just like that, she was in. The next few hours passed in a blur. Rachel chopped onions until her eyes burned, wiped tables, carried trays, stacked cans. Her hands ached, but her mind was calm for the first time in days. Nobody asked where she came from. Nobody looked twice at her worn shoes or tired eyes. They just showed her what to do and thanked her when she did it. By the time the last pot was scrubbed, Rachel was exhausted, but in a way that felt earned. Karen, the woman with the clipboard, handed her a bottled water and patted her arm. "You did good today," she said. Rachel nodded, too tired to speak, but inside her chest, something stirred, something steady, quiet, and new. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was drifting. The lunch rush had just ended when the door chimed. Rachel stood behind the counter, wiping down trays, still humming a tune she'd picked up from one of the volunteers. Her apron was stained, her hair pulled back in a messy twist, but she felt more grounded than she had in months. This place had become a kind of heartbeat, small, consistent, steady. The man who stepped through the door didn't belong to the usual crowd. He wore a dark wool coat, tailored and sharp, the kind you didn't often see on this side of town. His shoes were polished, his posture composed. But it wasn't the clothes that caught her attention. It was his eyes, blue, steady, strangely familiar. He paused just inside, scanning the room until his gaze landed on her, and then he smiled, just faintly. Rachel froze. It couldn't be. He walked toward her slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Hi," he said, voice warm, more certain than she remembered. She stared. Her hands gripped the edge of the tray. "Do I know you?" He tilted his head. "You once handed me $10 at a bus depot. No questions asked. I haven't forgotten that." The memory slammed into her all at once. The cold, the trembling hands, the crumpled bill she'd let go of with more fear than faith. Her mouth opened, then closed. "You," she breathed. He nodded. "I looked for you, the next day. I came back to that depot, asked the clerk, asked around. But you were gone." Rachel didn't know what to say. He looked like a different man, confident, clean-shaven, like he belonged in a boardroom, not in a damp hoodie beneath city lights. "I never forgot," he added, "and I promised myself, if I ever saw you again, I'd return what you gave me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded $10 bill. Rachel looked down at it, then back at him. She didn't take it, at least not yet. Instead, she asked the only question that made sense. "Who are you?" The man smiled softly, as if he'd been expecting that question. "Adam," he said. "Adam Carter." The name meant nothing to her at first, just a name, like any other. But there was something in the way he said it. Measured, careful, like he knew what was coming next would change things. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a sleek black business card. He held it out to her, and she took it, eyes scanning the white lettering. Adam Carter. CEO, Lumatech Initiative founder, the Carter Foundation. Rachel blinked. She'd heard of Lumatech. Most people had. They'd been in the news last year for launching AI-driven education programs in low-income school districts. Her thumb brushed the raised print. This is your company." Adam nodded. "It started as a 2-person startup in my garage 10 years ago. Now we focus on social tech, education, housing access, systems that work for people who usually get left behind." Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "And the shelter. You just walked in?" He smiled again. "Not exactly. I was nearby for a board meeting at a city partnership site. Saw the sign. Something told me to stop in." She narrowed her eyes, half skeptical. "You expect me to believe that's a coincidence?" "Maybe it is, maybe not. But I meant it when I said I've been looking for you." He paused, then his voice softened. "I want to offer you something. Not out of pity, not as a favor, but because I believe people like you, people who act with heart when they have nothing, are exactly who should be shaping the world we're trying to build." Rachel stared at him, the card still in her hand, the $10 bill untouched between them. And for the second time since she'd met this man, she felt her life tilt slightly, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet, and something new was beginning. Rachel didn't say yes right away. She wasn't sure she believed it was real, but Adam didn't pressure her. He simply gave her time, his card, and an address. "Come by when you're ready," he'd said. "No suits, no expectations, just a conversation." A week later, she did. The Carter Foundation's offices weren't flashy. Tucked inside a renovated warehouse near the river, the building pulsed with quiet purpose. Murals lined the walls, desks buzzed with conversation, and whiteboards overflowed with ideas. Housing equity projects, mobile medical units, digital learning labs. It felt less like an office, more like a think tank with heart. Adam met her in the lobby and introduced her not as someone he was helping, but as someone who had something to offer. That alone shook her. She started in a training cohort, 4 others from different walks of life, all survivors of something. The foundation didn't ask for resumes. They asked for lived experience, resilience, empathy, skills that didn't always show up on paper. Rachel learned fast: grant writing, community mapping, program development. She shadowed caseworkers and sat in on meetings with local nonprofits. She visited shelters, food banks, even a recovery center. And slowly, without realizing when it started, she began to believe she belonged. It wasn't easy. Some days she doubted herself. She still flinched when someone raised their voice or hesitated before reaching for a cup of coffee she didn't think she deserved. But the team never made her feel less than. They saw her. And in the quiet moments, during commutes, over cold lunches, between training sessions, she began to imagine what she might do if given the chance. What kind of change she could help create. It was a new feeling, strange and delicate. But for the first time in a long time, Rachel didn't feel like she was surviving. She was learning how to lead. The idea came to Rachel one quiet afternoon, while chopping carrots in the kitchen of a women's shelter on the east side of town. She'd been helping serve lunch, listening to a woman share how hard it was just to get across the city for food without a working bus pass. That night, it stayed with her. What if the food didn't wait for people to come to it? What if it came to them? She pitched it hesitantly during a team brainstorming session. An old delivery van, converted into a mobile kitchen. A way to serve hot meals where traditional shelters couldn't reach. Streets, tent camps, underfunded neighborhoods with few resources. Somewhere in her gut, she knew the people on those corners because she'd once been one of them. To her surprise, the room didn't go silent. Instead, heads nodded. Questions came fast, but not with doubt, with interest. Someone jotted notes on the whiteboard. Another offered to check grant options. Adam, leaning in from the back of the room, simply said, "Let's build it." 2 months later, she stood in the foundation's parking lot, staring at a powder blue van with "Open Hands" painted in soft letters across the side. Her fingers traced the logo, barely believing it was real. Her real. Opening night, she drove to the same park where she'd once curled up under a statue to escape the wind. She served soup, bread, fresh fruit. Nothing fancy, but warm, real, and offered without conditions. Within the first hour, over 100 people had come through, but more than the food, she offered presents. She remembered names, asked stories, offered a smile that said, "You matter." And something changed in her that night. It wasn't just about helping anymore. It was about giving people what she herself had once needed most: dignity without pity, belonging without a price tag, a reminder that they weren't invisible. As the last bowl was handed out and the van doors closed, Rachel stood beneath the stars, exhausted but full in a way food couldn't reach. This wasn't charity. It was purpose, rolling forward on 4 wheels. Teehee was a quiet Saturday when Rachel saw him again. She had just wrapped up a community lunch in the park, one of the new regular stops for the Open Hands van. The tables were cleared, the last of the folding chairs stacked. She stepped back for a moment, letting the sunlight filter through the branches overhead. And then she saw him. Sitting alone on a bench beneath a cluster of dogwood trees, a familiar wool scarf tucked neatly around his neck, a paper bag resting beside him. Frank. Her chest tightened. She hadn't seen him since the day he offered her that sandwich, that day that shifted everything. She crossed the grass quickly, her voice caught in a half-laugh, half-sob. "Frank, I've thought about you every single day." He looked up with a smile that was somehow both gentle and knowing. "I hoped you'd find your way," he said. She sat beside him, barely resisting the urge to throw her arms around his shoulders. "You fed me when no one even saw me." "All I did was give lunch to a hungry girl," he said softly. "But you built something." They talked like old friends, catching up as the sun sank lower. And then, just as Rachel reached for the paper bag he'd brought, Frank chuckled and added casually, "I'm glad you found your way to Adam." Rachel blinked. "You know him?" He gave her a sideways glance, eyes twinkling. I should. He's my son. The ground shifted beneath her again, this time with warmth, not fear. You sent me to Karen that day. You knew exactly what you were doing. I saw what he saw, Frank said. Someone the world tried to overlook but couldn't. Not for long. Rachel stared at him, stunned into silence. It wasn't coincidence, not entirely. Some connections are built in silence, in small kindnesses that ripple further than we can ever see. A few weeks later, Rachel and Adam walked side by side through a community garden nestled between two apartment blocks, one of the newer projects Open Hands had helped support. Children ran barefoot between planter boxes. Volunteers chatted near wheelbarrows, their gloves caked in fresh soil. The scent of rosemary and tomato vines clung to the warm air. Adam had been quiet all afternoon. Finally, as they reached the edge of the garden beneath the shade of a magnolia tree just beginning to bloom, he spoke. I've been offered something, he said. A new opportunity. Rachel looked at him, heart pausing. The foundation is expanding, he continued. Chicago. A satellite office focused on urban outreach. They asked me to lead it. Her chest tightened. She didn't speak. Not yet. I told them I wouldn't go without making you the same offer, he added. I want you there too. Rachel let the words settle. She thought of the garden around them, of the faces she now saw every week, of the team she'd grown with, the streets that had once swallowed her whole and now seemed to carry her forward. I don't know, she said honestly. I love what we've built here. These people. They were the first to believe in me. Adam nodded. I understand. She glanced up at him. I'm not saying no. I just feel like I'm still supposed to be rooted here for a while longer. His smile was soft. That's why I admire you. They sat for a while on a nearby bench, not needing to fill the quiet. Something steady passed between them. Respect, gratitude, maybe more. Maybe this is where the road splits, she said. Maybe, he replied, but only on a map. She looked at him, the boy from the depot now fully a man with vision, and knew this wasn't an ending. It was a pause. And love, she was learning, could stretch across more than just miles. 1 year later, the city hadn't changed much, but Rachel had. The streets that once felt like a maze of detours now pulsed with direction. She knew their corners, their people, their quiet rhythms. Her days started early and ended late, but they were full, purposeful. The Open Hands project had grown beyond what she ever imagined. With expanded routes and a full roster of volunteers, their mobile kitchen now served over 2,000 meals a week. But more than meals, they offered connection. People called by name, hands held without judgment, stories remembered. Inside the newly opened community center, a former firehouse turned hub, they now hosted workshops, job training, therapy circles, and a safe room for women and children. Rachel oversaw it all with a calm she'd never known she had. Not as a savior, not as a hero, but as someone who understood what it felt like to be unseen, and was determined to change that for others. When the invitation to Washington, D.C. arrived, she didn't believe it at first. The Carter Foundation had submitted her story, for a national award in community innovation, and she'd won. Standing at the podium, lights bright on her face, cameras clicking, Rachel wore a simple dress and the same locket she'd worn the day she left her apartment for the last time. In her hand was a folded note of thanks. But as she looked out over the crowd, all she could think about was that cold bench, that sandwich, that moment when kindness cracked through hopelessness like morning light. She cleared her throat. I'm not here because I had a plan, she said. I'm here because someone believed in me when I had nothing, and I chose to believe in someone else. That was enough to begin. The applause was loud, but inside she felt something quieter and stronger. She had found her place in the world, and it had started with just $10 and a choice to care. The anniversary celebration for open hands was far from extravagant. Just rows of mismatched folding chairs, handmade streamers, and a slightly crooked banner that read, "1 year of serving together." But to Rachel, it felt like a palace. This place, this community, this moment, every piece of it felt sacred. The walls were strung with photos, frozen smiles, warm embraces, trays of food steaming beneath string lights. She wandered past them slowly, each image tugging at her heart. Every face had a story, every hand she'd held, every name she'd learned. It had all led to this. Then she saw him. Adam. He stood at the edge of the room, near the serving table, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers. Nothing fancy, but full of color and care. Something small sat in the inner pocket of his coat. Their eyes met, and in that instant the hum of conversation around them melted away. He moved through the crowd like he'd done it 1,000 times, as if drawn toward her by something unspoken and inevitable. "You came," she breathed, her voice already trembling with emotion. "I told you I would," he said, his smile quiet but unmistakably proud. Without needing to be told, the room softened. Conversations faded, and a kind of hush rippled through the space, as if everyone sensed something beautiful was about to unfold. Adam reached into his coat and pulled out a crisp $10 bill. He held it carefully between his fingers, reverently, like it was made of glass. "I've been carrying this," he said, voice steady but thick with meaning. "Not to repay a debt, but to remember the moment I stopped being invisible." Rachel's breath caught, her eyes stinging. Then he reached again, this time drawing out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple, elegant ring that shimmered in the low light. "You gave me faith," he said, stepping closer, "when I had nothing to offer. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were right." Tears spilled down her cheeks, her lips parted, breath shaking. "Yes," she whispered through tears and a smile. "Of course, yes." The room erupted in applause, but Rachel barely heard it. All she felt was his hand in hers, the soft weight of the bill between them, and the overwhelming truth that a single act of compassion could echo through eternity. Later that night, beneath the soft glow of string lights swaying above the community hall, Rachel stood beside Adam, laughter echoing all around them. She held the $10 bill once more, edges worn now, but full of meaning. She looked down at it, then smiled. "This," she said softly, "was never just money. It was the beginning." A few feet away, a little girl she'd met during outreach tugged at her apron, offering a crayon drawing of a flower. Rachel knelt to accept it, heart overflowing. She looked at Adam, then at the people around her, those who had once been strangers, now family. "A little kindness," she whispered, "can be the seed of a miracle." And in that moment, she knew, with absolute clarity, that she hadn't just changed her life. She had begun changing the world. We live in a world where judgment often comes faster than kindness, where people walk past suffering, assuming it's deserved, or avoid eye contact altogether. But Rachel's story reminds us that the smallest gesture, given in the darkest moment, can ripple outward and become something life-changing. She didn't help because she had extra. She helped because something in her still believed in people. And in return, life gave her more than she ever expected. Not riches, but meaning. Not just survival, but purpose. We never know who someone really is, or what battle they're fighting. The man who looked like he had nothing turned out to have the power to lift her out. But even if he hadn't, she still would have done the right thing. Because character is what we show when we think no one's watching. So the next time you see someone in need, remember Rachel. You might just be the beginning of their miracle. If this story moved you, subscribe for more true-to-life inspiration. Like, share, and leave a comment to tell us your favorite moment. We read every word. Your voice keeps this channel going.